Welcome to the Sportswoman Show. I'm your host, Gabby Hoffman. From gator hunting in the swamps of Florida to fly fishing in the cold water streams of the Mountain West, join us as we explore real human stories of women, from influencers to scientists to policymakers who are spending their lives in the outdoors. Let's begin. Heather, thank you so much for joining the Sportswoman Show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I apologize if you hear any background noise. It's the sound of tape guns gently humming in the warehouse. So that means business is happening.
Well, people may be familiar with you and they may be familiar with Heather's Choice, but I would love you to share with our listeners kind of your backstory. How did you get involved in the outdoors and what specifically makes you excited about doing outdoor activities?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was born and raised here in Anchorage, Alaska, and I wouldn't say that I necessarily grew up in a really outdoorsy family. We went camping, kind of, sort of. We went fishing, kind of, sort of, but definitely wouldn't say that I grew up like really in the outdoors. It wasn't until I was hired by a local rafting company when I was 18, growing up in Girdwood, that I really started to get introduced to, sleeping outside, going on extended backcountry trips. And that was a pretty big turning point for me, was getting to go on long river trips and spending lots and lots and lots of time, you know, on rubber boats, floating water. And that's really kind of where I fell in love with the outdoors.
And you would say that Alaska is like the perfect outdoor space because I went to Alaska for the first time. It does live up to being a sportsman's paradise, but having Alaska in your backyard, that must have been really impactful on you.
Yeah, we're so spoiled here. It's ridiculous. Where I grew up in Bird Creek, which is just south of Anchorage, our family property is 2.5 acres that's butted up against Chugach State Park. So we would have grizzly bears roll through the backyard and moose and black bears and wolves and foxes and all of that. So I think growing up on the edge of the wilderness, I've kind of taken that for granted. And then still being here in Alaska, I sometimes forget just how fortunate we are to have a, humongous backyard.
I stayed near Chugach State Park actually at an Airbnb that looked like a yurt, and I didn't get to see any bears, but I did see a lot of moose in the airport area, going south on Seward Highway. So it seemed to me like there were more moose than there were deer and anything else. So like moose are like your guys' deer up there. Would you say that?
Oh, yeah, and it never gets old seeing them. 'Em. They're the funniest looking animals ever. And it just never gets old seeing them cruising around town.
And would you say, obviously coming from Alaska and kind of having this outdoor adjacent kind of experience, is that what kind of inspired you to launch your business with Heather's Choice? A little bit, did it fuel your kind of passion or interest to kind of explore that business?
And that's a good story. So I, like I said, was hired on by a local rafting company when I was 18. And for 5 years, I would go to college in the winter and come home and be a raft guide in the summer. And my last year guiding, I had just graduated from Western Washington University. And there was a gal that I worked with that was going on a Grand Canyon trip. And I was kind of like, what? That sounds awesome. I'm not going back to school. I just graduated. I don't have any plans for the winter. What do you mean you're going rafting for 25 days in the middle of the Grand Canyon? Tell me more. And so I ended up signing myself up as a boat captain for this extended river trip. And that was a major turning point because I had just graduated from Western, where I had a degree in evolutionary nutrition. I had spent 4 years as a collegiate rower and had really sort of developed my own stance on what it meant to eat for optimal performance. And then as I was sort of developing my own little nutritional philosophy, I found myself saying yes to an extended backcountry trip and realized that the food options that were available did not fit sort of the dogma that I had created for my own performance nutrition. And so I ended up dehydrating 50 pounds of food to take with me on my first really long river trip. And that's really where the idea for Heather's Choice was born. And I have to say that I ate like a freaking queen on this 20 some odd day river trip. And it's so crazy to think back to that because I distinctly remember sitting on my boat with my friend Jason, just kind of talking about how cool it would be to start a line of dehydrated food for wilderness trips. And here we are. That was 2011. It's now 2024. So 13 years later, I'm now living and breathing what it's like for that little inkling of an idea to turn into a business.
And what are some of the offerings that Heather's Choice offers? Like, what kind of meals can customers expect who don't know what you guys offer?
Yeah. So the whole Heather's Choice adventure menu is lightweight, packable, gluten free, and dehydrated. So we make meals like our best seller is a grass fed bison chili. And what's unique to Heather's Choice is that we actually make big old batches, 40 gallons of grass fed bison chili at a time. And then we dehydrate it overnight so that it is fully shelf stable. It gets packaged into a bag. And so then when you, as the consumer, want to eat that meal, you simply add boiling water to the bag, let it sit, let it rehydrate. And then it tastes just like it did, when it came out of the kettle. And that's really what we pride ourselves on is making meals that taste homemade but with the convenience of being lightweight, packable, and shelf stable. So we have the meals, we have breakfast, like our morning glory oatmeal is my personal favorite. And then we also have what I would consider our gateway product. They're called Packaroons, and they are coconut cookies for your backpack. And people might be familiar with those because they're everywhere.
And because of just the uniqueness about your company, you've garnered some interesting attention. You were most recently on Shark Tank. How was that experience for you and the company?
That experience is one that I will never forget. So, for folks who don't know, Shark Tank is in its 15th season, and they get about 50,000 companies a year that apply to be on the show. Because you've likely heard of the Shark Tank effect before. Being on the show, I think, is valued at $10 million worth of PR. So, you have tons of folks who, apply every year, and then they only film 150. So, they whittle that down to a very slim number of teams who actually get to go and pitch to the Sharks. But then from that 150, they only take 80 of them and actually put them on air. So the statistic is your chances of getting on Shark Tank are about 0.0016.
Wow.
Yeah. So I haphazardly threw my name in the hat in January of 23. Just went to abc.com, figured out how to apply, promptly forgot about it. And then in April of last year, got a phone call from one of the casting producers. And so we worked on preparing our pitch, preparing the set, getting ready to walk out onto that stage for almost 5 months. And I filmed in September of 23, and then we aired in January of 24. And I would say that the Shark Tank experience definitely dominated my 2023.
And what has been the reception since you appeared on the show?
Oh man, it's been really wild because, as I mentioned, I really started Heather's Choice thinking that I was making meals for my fellow, rafting buddies. And on the show, the Sharks made it abundantly clear that Heather's Choice should be sold everywhere to everybody, right? Because if you think about yourself in your everyday life, you eat your lunch at your desk probably 99 more times than you do, eating a meal in the backcountry, right? And it's been really wild for me to realize that this little idea that I had to make dehydrated meals for my friends has now evolved into something that people could use at work, traveling, for the elderly, for college kids, for people who are recovering from illness, military, disaster preparedness. And that's pretty overwhelming for this gal. But it's also very exciting to see that the products that we've developed can be of service to a much wider audience of people.
Do you think it's going to lead to you having some sort of business deals with some of the big box stores or some of like operators like that? Have people reached out to you since then? Because I could imagine you've gotten some good offers.
Yeah, one of the most interesting ones that we got even just this week was Amtrak, right? I don't know the last
Track.
time any of us rode the Amtrak, but it turns out they need to have meals on board in case of derailments, which I guess happen.
They do happen, unfortunately. Yeah.
Right. And like that is not an opportunity I have ever thought about. But all of a sudden it's like, yeah, it needs to be shelf stable, it needs to be lightweight, it needs to be convenient, it needs to be healthy, it needs to sustain people. So I feel like I can now see a little bit of the tip of the iceberg of what the opportunity is. And what people don't realize is that we still make these meals very much like we are making something homemade. We chop the onions fresh, we saute it with spices, we add in the meat and the veggies, and we simmer it all together. So I haven't yet figured out how the heck we're actually going to make, 100 times more of this while still maintaining the quality that we have today. That's kind of the perplexing part.
Yeah, scaling up businesses from what I understand is a little difficult, but you sound like you're adept at it and a smart businesswoman and you'll be able to figure it out. But kind of since you've had this success and you have I believe done a lot in the outdoor industry in some capacity. I have no doubt you've probably interacted with like anglers and hunters and others. So what has been your experience with that? And have you like branched out to other activities or gotten the product kind of in front of, rafting adjacent type outdoor participants?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. When I started in the summer of 2014, I was literally just dehydrating food and giving it away, right? To anybody who was going pack rafting, hiking, didn't matter. I was just giving it to people. And to my surprise, when I officially launched the business, one of my first customers was a hunter. And it was somebody who was going on a mountain goat hunt, a sheep hunt, a moose hunt. And I think that this guy ordered like 40 dinners, 40 breakfasts, 40 pack-roons. And at the time, I was hand making everything in my apartment, and I was completely overwhelmed with this first initial order. But it was eye-opening that this person was basically going to spend all of September and half of October out in the field. From there, we ended up getting introduced to the hunting community through Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, which is a group that I had the pleasure of sitting on the national board for a while. And I would say that the hunting community was absolutely our early adopters. And that was really the customer that put us on the map and helped us get into stores like Sportsman's Warehouse, Shields, things like that.
And working in the outdoor industry directly, indirectly, you probably have encountered a lot of people and there's a lot of these outdoor businesses that kind of come to fruition and you seem to have staying power. Some don't, succeed, some kind of crumble, some kind of, pan out after a time. In terms of having longevity, maybe someone listening, a woman listening to the program is curious to start an outdoor business, maybe to kind of strengthen her hobbies, with fishing, camping, hiking, hunting. What advice would you have to someone like that who's entrepreneurial, might be a little deterred? It's a really, tough environment to start a business in today, unfortunately, with that. But the entrepreneurial spirit is still alive and well. But what advice would you have for someone listening who might want to create their own business but doesn't know where to start?
Oh my gosh, I have about 100 pieces of advice. I would say for the person who's talking about starting a business, I would be really clear on what game you're trying to play. And what I mean by that is there's a world where I could still be making Heather's Choice myself in my kitchen, selling it to a local demographic of people, and I could keep it at a size and scale to where I can really run it, manage it, and I can be not only the owner of the business, but also the manager and the technician and the person who's actually doing the thing. That's one strategy and one way to grow slowly over time and sort of keep it manageable. In contrast, you will see a lot of the bigger brands out there who have decided to take on outside capital, to take on investment. And with that comes the expectation that you are going to grow and you are going to grow fast and you are going to grow consistently year over year. I was recruited early on in probably 2016 to participate in a local accelerator program. And that's really what got us in front of angel investors and sort of set us on that path. And I distinctly remember somebody saying to me early on, one of my business mentors I still work with today, and he was like, Heather, once you go down this path, there is no turning back, right? Once you accept outside capital, you can't just turn around and go back to being a lifestyle business. And so that has been a constant bit of tension for me as I've been growing Heather's Choice is that expectation to grow, dealing with other people's expectations of what this should be and what it should turn into. And so I would just caution people to get really clear on whether or not you are trying to build a business that you want to eventually become your full time and to support your lifestyle versus trying to grow something that you want to be national, global, whatever the case may be, and something that you want to have a bit more of a worldly vision for. And again, I find myself getting kind of hugged back towards like, oh, I could just do this as kind of like my 30-year legacy. But my vision for Heather's Choice is that it'll grow way beyond me and that it will be, my legacy. It will not be something that simply pays my bills at the end of the day.
That's great advice. Very to the heart with that. Heather, I wanted to ask you something relating to, more women participating in the outdoors. And we've seen lots of efforts to get women to go rafting, hunting, hiking, fishing, climbing, being involved, in conservation in general. And for the most part, I would say women are having a seat at the table. Sometimes we may have some obstacles. But let's say a woman who hasn't really partaken in any of these outdoor activities wants to get involved. They may be a little skeptical. What advice would you impart to them about taking the plunge, getting involved, even as simply as, just picking up a rod and reel or learning how to raft or just starting out with basics, going to national parks even?
Man, I will say that even for myself, as somebody who learned how to hunt in my adult years, signing up for something like what we have here in Alaska, becoming an outdoors woman, a whole organization that puts together classes, courses, events where, they're teaching women these skills that they might need when they're out in the wilderness. I want to say I paid like $15 or something ridiculously cheap for a women's specific hunter safety course. And that made my experience of learning how to shoot a gun so much better, right? Because all of a sudden I was in a room with a bunch of other women who were at the same tipping point that I was of, hey, I'm learning a new skill. I need to ask all the dumb questions. I've never done this before. And it was such a lovely experience and so warm and welcoming. So I would encourage any woman who's, curious, whether it's backpacking, rafting, hunting, fishing, whatever it is, to look for those organizations that are intentionally promoting women in the outdoors and go to one of those in-person events because I think that you'll be really pleasantly surprised how much more fun it is to be standing beside somebody who's at the same learning point that you are. And you will realize how much support there is for you to get involved in these activities.
And in 2024, as we're talking today, there are so many opportunities. And I was very fortunate to start out fishing when I was little. I had my dad. But now we're seeing women, whether they're mothers or their friends, and they're showing people how to go fishing, for instance. So it's really cool to see kind of the dynamics change where it's not only just men, but also women introducing their children or their friends to the sport. So I'm encouraged by that. And I'm so encouraged by your story about succeeding on the entrepreneurial front and making dehydrated food delectable and delicious and portable. I have to at some point try some of the offerings at Heather's Choice. But is there anything else you'd like to impart to our listeners? A final parting thought perhaps about anything we've talked about or something you want to include?
I'm somebody who kind of throws myself at things and allows myself to get pretty obsessed, whether it was learning how to raft or it was learning to row crew or it was starting a business. Like I will just throw myself at something wholeheartedly. So I don't know if I would say that I would make that recommendation for everybody because, trial by fire is not always painless. But I would encourage anybody who has the wonderment, has the curiosity to really try to physically put themselves in the rooms where people are doing what they aspire to do, whether that is learning how to fish or it is starting a business. If you can get some face to face time with people who are doing what it is that you want to do, I think that will really accelerate the learning curve and just allow you to get involved a lot faster rather than feeling like you're having to do everything on your own.
Well said. Heather, thank you so much for taking your time out of your very busy schedule to speak with us here on the Sportswoman Show. And we wish you continued success with Heather's Choice.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Sportswoman Show. Your support is so crucial. Take a moment right now if you can and help us out by hitting the subscribe button on your podcatcher of choice, leaving a review, sharing with your friends, and engaging with us on social media. We also need guest ideas. If you have a suggestion on a strong outdoor woman we need to talk to, shoot our producer an email at cody@troutstreamstudios.com.